Hello everyone, B.O.R.G Dexter here, and in this video I will be doing a mini review of the third and final DLC for KCD2 named Mysteria Ecclesiae. I guess that's how you pronounce that. This is a story-heavy DLC that takes place on the Sedlets monastery grounds, which is a real place that was inhabited by Cistercian monks at the time. This DLC starts by talking to Peter of Pisek, the Lord of Suchdol Fortress, and the former Mint Master. It asks Henry to accompany Albek to Sedlets Monastery. Albek is a scholar and a very skilled physician, and is King Wenceslas' personal physician, or doctor to use the more modern term. Wenceslas is apparently in a very bad state. Since King Wenceslas is under the imprisonment of Sigismund, which tried to usurp his throne, we are sent to the monastery to help Abbot Jan there, and then ask the abbot to intercede with Sigismund and allow Albek to visit King Wenceslas and assess his state of health. The abbot has a fair bit of influence with Sigismund, and they have close ties, so Henry is sent alongside Albek to act as his bodyguard should any trouble arise. Shortly after arriving in the monastery, you come to discover that there have been victims that fell to a mysterious disease, and Abbot Jan fears that a plague is afoot, but still doesn't want to alarm anyone. You can then opt to be given a tour of the place by the monk Petramil, which I recommend you take that opportunity. What follows, narratively speaking, is a pretty interesting story with some unexpected twists and some very obvious ones, to be fair, with a second helping of some side quests. Like I already said, this is a story-heavy DLC, and there is little to do beside passing some skill checks in dialogues and exploring the monastery grounds while seeking people to progress the story. What I mean by this is that there is some activities like brewing potions and some sneaking and combat, but the vast majority of the DLC is spent talking, which might be the biggest downside in this DLC in my opinion. Alongside the fact that in this DLC there isn't any new side activity or minigame, unlike the previous two DLCs that introduced painting shields with very interesting and neat patterns and color schemes, and blacksmithing in the second DLC, which admittedly, while a bit shallow, was a welcome addition. As far as the gameplay goes, again, you will most often explore around the monastery grounds that include an infirmary, a workers' camp, and a camp that houses the Knights of the Teutonic Order. Sometimes you will need to brew potions or maybe find some items, but for the most part talking to people with the occasional skill check in dialogues will make most of the gameplay, with some sneaking sections thrown in. Another thing that somewhat neuters the gameplay in the DLC is the fact that it's not really suitable for late game characters, which is how I played. My high level endgame Henry made short work of what little combat and sneaking there was. It was pretty easy and unchallenging, bar the final boss fight. I'll talk about that later. Even with my armor and weapons confiscated upon entering these hallowed grounds, I had no issues stealing items I needed from chests. Your lockpicks stay with you, by the way, or just stealthily knocking out guards and looting their combat gear. Just make sure to give enough time for the items to lose their stolen status, so the guards don't notice that you are wearing or using their gear. This too, by the way, was made easier with certain perks I had. Add to this the fact that there are no new game mechanics, however small or a bit shallow as they might be sometimes, makes the gameplay a bit dull. I also had some displays of Euro jank, so to speak, and to be quite frank, it made me chuckle more than once.
You'll have to explain something to me. I expected all sorts in your cell, but jewelry? What's the meaning of it?
You'll have to figure that out. I've already told you more than I should have.
That's no help to me.
So, the gameplay itself is lacking, to be honest. Do any other aspects of the DLC pull it the other way and make up for the lackluster gameplay? Up to a certain point, yes. First, the environment itself is new, and it was pleasurable to go from wandering the monastery grounds aimlessly and lost to eventually being an expert that could give tours, knowing every nook and cranny of the place, and needless to say it serves you well in gameplay too, as the main quest is timed. The monastery interior is vast and detailed, featuring a garden, monk lodgings, a dining hall, chapels, and the abbot's quarters, and then there is the main large area, of which is under renovation, with large colorful windows that bathe the space in light, and big religious themed painting. There is also an expansive monastery cellar, which houses a clandestine book and comedy club. No kidding, I'm serious. I'm somewhat serious. You'll see what I
The
mean.
priest replies, "Have you tried taking off your armor before going to bed?"
Tell me another one.
5 clergymen meet, and they've nothing to tell each other. Because they all turned up.
Tell me another one.
How does an astrologer flag down a wagon?
No idea.
By his sign.
Aside from the monastery, there is space dedicated, like I said, to housing the workers and a camp for the Teutonic Knights, as well as a small herbalist place and an infirmary. Side quests, while mostly short and over quickly, are interesting. I especially love how the entire DLC depicts perfectly how hard living must have been then, mainly due to ignorance and a lack of understanding things. For example, I came upon a monk that was sleep deprived. After digging deeper, I immediately recognized that he suffers from sleep paralysis. Now, I only experienced sleep paralysis once in my life, and it was terrifying. So basically what happens is your mind wakes up, but the body is completely unable to move. This is often, not in my case luckily, accompanied by feeling a menacing presence of someone in the room watching you, or from actual hallucinations of horrifying stuff. One of the things the monk in question says he saw was a succubus, a seductive demon of folklore that visits men while they sleep and tempts them to commit carnal sins, which the monk claims he has managed to resist. Consider that he is a monk that is held to a higher standard than normal people, and in an age where people that were often wrongfully and through no fault of their own shunned by society and sometimes punished even more severely, simply for being seen as sinful and wicked. Henry confided that he sometimes had nightmares, and after getting to know the monk a bit better, he offers to pray with him, gives him a potion that helps with sleep, and consoles him to great appreciation. A great quest. This is not the only time I felt the game depicted the way fear and ignorance adversely affected the game's inhabitants. The most interesting quest, aside from the main one, is finding Boleslav Bavor's tomb, a knight that had a storied life and journeyed to the Holy Land. Also an amazing quest. There are other, smaller quests beside these, but I found these two the most memorable. And Warhorse, you know that side quest where you need to collect crayfish for additional food for the monks? Yeah, fuck that quest, you can fuck right off with that. This was the only side quest in the DLC that I gave up on. Basically, you have to collect these crayfish at night while it's raining with poor visibility. You have to collect these crayfish from fish ponds, and they're pretty hard to spot. I only managed to find a few, and after trying to do this quest for maybe about 35-40 minutes, I decided to quit the quest and say fuck it. Now it's a good thing to note that while at the start of the DLC you will not be able to skip time. But keep in mind that the time goes on regardless, so time is of the essence, considering the disease that is on the loose. Another thing that I always appreciated in KCD 1 and 2 is the fact that, should you choose to do so, you can get additional information on the places, rituals, events, characters, creeds, etc. in the game. Not just via the codex section, but in dialogue with other characters as well. I enjoyed learning of the creeds and values of this monastic order or of the Teutonic Knights order, learning of their history, for what and against whom they fought, and their place in the world. Interesting stuff. The characters themselves are also pretty good. Albek is a very educated, compassionate man with a heart of gold, not discriminating and helping everyone, noble and poor alike. And he even spoke to me of writing a book for the people about keeping in good health and focusing on prevention rather than healing the consequences. He even compares the living habits of Italians, where he got his education, and Bohemians at the time, and how those different approaches to lifestyles affect the vitality and health of the two different peoples. Zacharias is the personal physician of Sigismund and speaks of Albek as an old friend and mentor. He is also helping with the disease. Deneš Lackvi, real last name Lackovic, is a man from Zadar whose uncle betrayed Sigismund, and Deneš endeavors to get back into Sigismund's good graces by working for Zacharias as his aide. There are some other more major or minor NPCs like Slavek and Jacek, the two Teutonic knights, or Benedict, the novice monk. Albek is the most developed character, and others, while they do have some depth depending on their level of involvement in the DLC, they are somewhat less interesting. As far as music goes, it is very minimal. Occasionally you will get a choir in the background, and I didn't notice any new music for the DLC. And frankly, I don't mind. I'm not gonna hold that against the DLC. So, the main quest consists at first of finding clues about the disease and working to suppress it. You will interrogate people and examine victims. After a while, an interesting twist occurs, and the disease will be only half the issue. However, I must say that I saw who the main baddie was from a mile away, and you don't need to be a Mensa member to see it coming. The process of investigating the disease, as well as crafting a way to shield yourself from potential infection, as well as investigating and solving problems and plot points that come later, were satisfying, for me at least. You might recall that I said that I would talk more about the last boss fight in the DLC. I think the fight demonstrates perfectly the struggle this game has between realism and a game with built-in RPG stats regarding combat. What do I mean by this? Well, it's the fact that when you slam your sword full force on someone's unarmored head, they don't even scratch themselves as a response and proceed to turn around and wail on you. This happens, of course, when an enemy has high stats that are relevant for combat. This boss fight is no different. The guy is unarmored but is an insane glutton for punishment. No matter how many times I hit him or performed a master strike on him, his health didn't care. Had to apply poison on my blade, and even then it was a somewhat long fight. And get this, I even had a guard that was nearby try to attack me, as if I attacked an innocent NPC and he wanted to punish me for my crimes. Know that, story-wise, everyone in the monastery should, by now, know he is the main baddie of the DLC. Here is another fact, story-related, that you might find annoying a bit. I know I did. This is a somewhat small spoiler in my opinion, so you should skip ahead to the time on screen if you wanna avoid it. Okay, you ready to hear this? Here goes. You actually never find out what the disease in the monastery was, unless I missed something major, and I don't think I did. So I found that kinda underwhelming. I was hoping to find an explanation or description of what disease this is. One thing to note is that you should immediately complete any side quests you come upon, as a few quests are missable, and it happened to me too. Okay, now I'm gonna do an outline of positive and negative things in the DLC. First, the good stuff. Now, like I said, the story is pretty good. The new characters are interesting and developed for the most part. The side quests are also pretty good, especially the Boleslav Bavo quest. The DLC depicts how it must have been living back then, especially as a monk held to a higher standard than other peers, and sometimes people suffering through no fault of their own, because of lack of knowledge at the time. I found that pretty neat. Now, I forgot to mention that this DLC also has people in it that challenge the, at the time, church-imposed worldviews. I don't want to talk too much of that for spoiler reasons. The environment is expansive and has interesting stuff to discover. The DLC, as is tradition in any KCD game, allows you to dig deeper should you choose to do so in character dialogues and the codex section in the menus to learn a lot about certain groups, their creed and history, and the various characters in the game. I found this to be a pretty fun way to become interested in the relevant stuff and want to learn more. Okay, now for the negative stuff. The gameplay consists mostly of engaging in dialogue and passing skill checks in them. There are only small sections of stealth and combat. The DLC isn't very well adjusted for late game Henry, resulting in unchallenging combat and stealth section when they do appear. And despite your armor and weapons being taken away when you enter the monastery grounds, I had no trouble at all to get everything I needed by lockpicking and stealing gear from knocked out guards. You get to keep all your lockpicks, by the way, trivializing the difficulty further. Also, there aren't any new mechanics or things in this DLC, like we got shield painting and blacksmithing. Even a very simple, small minigame would be nice, like fishing for example, which I've seen a lot of the people request. The last boss fight shows the game's struggle between being realistic and taking into account the RPG stats and numbers in combat. In the end, I feel like this apparent end, from what I heard to Henry's adventures, was a bit underwhelming. I give the DLC a 7 out of 10, a decent DLC. Now, I'm gonna make a small wish list of sorts for Warhorse's next game, what I would like to see in the next project they do. First, I would love bloody and gruesome combat, with limbs chopped off and intestines separating with their owners. I would like to see, of course, more minigames and relevant skills for them, like maybe fishing or jousting. Warhorse needs to work more to balance the combat between being really realistic and taking the RPG stats too much into account, so that when I smack a non-armored enemy in the head with a mace, said enemy doesn't just casually turn around and proceed to beat my ass. The combat is also at times, it's better than KCD1 definitely, but it's still also kinda janky, like when I know I should have hit an enemy but my weapon just kinda slides off or goes through the enemy without harming him. Even though this DLC was somewhat of a letdown and underwhelming, to me at least, I am still impressed by what Warhorse achieved since the days of the first game, and I will definitely be there day one for whatever they decide to make next. Okay guys, that's gonna be it for this mini DLC review. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down, and let me know down in the comments below if you agree with my take on this DLC. What did you think of it if you played it? Also, please consider subscribing if you're interested in my future videos. Until next time.